This is Office Hours,
the show for sharing experiences and stories in governance, risk management, and compliance.
So, Dan...
I can't believe we let you back here.
Yeah. Well, I had something to share and you thought it was a good idea. So
and you're wearing the same red glasses.
I broke my other pair of glasses, so that's where we're at.
It's a good thing you have really good ideas, Phil.
Yeah. Let's see what the customers think. I was speaking with a customer the other day, and it was a securities management firm, and they were looking for a better way to manage their regulatory alerts.
Securities management firm. So
Yep.
Broker-dealer sort of?
They were an investment firm, so
Okay,
securities
sure.
management.
Yeah.
And they have specific regulatory obligations to FINRA, SEC, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them, well, how are you doing it today? And they said, well, we go and sign up. We go to the websites of all of these different regulators, and we click on that subscribe button, and then they get the emails from the regulators. And then hopefully somebody goes in there and tracks
Forwards
it on.
the email to somebody who cares?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then tracks it on some spreadsheet to make sure that it's tracked, and then any actions like updating policies or updating training is all done.
So I imagine what you're intending to share would be considering how you might make that process substantially more efficient.
Exactly.
So I had a similar one because I'm going to bounce some ideas back and forth off you, because what you described there was a company in the financial services business, specifically in securities management. That's a highly regulated industry where there's been a lot of pressure on regulators to create good feeds, good ways to get access to regulatory updates.
Right, because the examiner is actually going to come to you and say, what are you doing about all of these updates and regulatory alerts and guidance?
Right. But that's in financial services, specifically in securities in the United States. Some other places around the world that may not necessarily be so easy. So I similarly worked with a customer who was expanding operations very rapidly throughout, particularly through the developing world. And in every different country, right, has different employment law, as an example. Not to mention laws that regulate their industry specifically, but that regulate all businesses around employment law. How do I know when in Angola there's an update to employment law that we have to follow that and make a change? In their case, they'd hired law firms in every one of these countries and asked them to send them a mail every month or whatever the case was with those local regulatory updates that they thought they might be applicable to the business.
And what they do with the mail?
Well, they received them in legal and compliance and then forwarded them around an email until they hoped that somebody said, yeah, I think we're good.
That doesn't sound very efficient. It sounds like you might miss some things, and it sounds like also a lot of work.
Okay, so perhaps we have some shared experience here to do a bit better, but you have a really funny title that you've given this particular episode, Phil.
Yeah, because I was just alluding to, it's a lot of work to do all of that. And the more of these regulatory alerts you can ignore, the better.
Yeah, okay, and that seems like the opposite of what we just described. So how am I going to ignore regulatory alerts?
Actually, well, when I put together the regulatory alerts for this customer, it turned out I was reading through a lot of them, and they were really boring, and a lot of them weren't even applicable. Some of them were like, hey, we are having a board of governors election next month, and just letting you know in case you wanted to make a comment on that. Nobody wants to action that.
But that had come through the regulatory feed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the problem. That's one of the problems. Well, as we were just saying, one of the first thing you need to do is aggregate all of these feeds together.
Right. Okay. Back up a step. Yep.
So what you can actually do is all of the primary regulators out there, whether it's FDIC, the CMS, OCC, NCUA, SEC, FINRA.
I've never seen so many bloody acronyms on one slide before.
Yeah. All of these regulators publish all of their regulatory updates in a subscription feed that you can go to their website and click a button and put your email address.
Okay, unless I'm missing something, though. I think these are all U.S. regulators.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So all U.S. regulators, but they have RSS feed available for regulatory updates.
Yep.
Okay.
And so normally what people do is just go to the website, put in their email address, and then they would get the emails.
Right.
But what a smarter way to do that is actually to use a set of automation scripts to pull all of the updates from the feeds and aggregate them together, pull out keywords, and then put them into a central repository.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
So I assume that's what you had attempted to do here.
Absolutely. So what we did was we actually created a script which actually just goes and you plug in the regulator and the URL, the link for the RSS feed, and the script goes through each one, pulls it down, and combines them all
Now,
together.
when you say script, you're exposing our bias as ACL. We work for the company ACL.
Yep.
But this is our data automation and aggregation engine
Sure.
to pull all that, put it together, and consolidate it. You need some form of, call it robotic type automation to be able to do that.
Sure. You could have written this script in something else as well. This is
Now,
just our
but these
choice.
ones are all off of RSS feeds.
Correct.
What about the situation where I'm getting the spreadsheet emails from the law firm in Angola?
Right. So if you would have gotten a spreadsheet, as long as it's in a place that you put it every month or send it to an FTP or something, then you can have the automation pick the spreadsheet up from that
Right.
place, combine it with the RSS feeds, and now you have a single regulatory
So that's
feed.
exactly what we did for the customer I was describing, is we would consolidate these into a centralized list, a centralized repository like you're talking about here, and we'd categorize them by geography and call it department. So in this case, Angola HR, and based on that, send it out to legal and HR responsible for that region to understand what we should do next. Is that where you were headed with your
to a degree.
feeds?
So I took all these feeds, put them together, and then I ended up realizing that there's a lot of updates, like on the tune of hundreds over the past few months.
The past few months?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So it's a lot to go through, and I thought I started reading through them. Some of them were not important. I thought there's got to be a way that we can.
That's really smart because in my case, we were getting a few less. They were actioning every single one of them, but we were getting less because the law firm had already been the filter.
Oh, right. So you're paying money for somebody else to be reading for them.
Exactly.
Through them, yeah.
Yeah, you paid external counsel to say at least, like, they don't know all of our operations, external counsel, but they have a good enough idea about what our business is to say, hey, this is a mining regulation
Right.
and you're a manufacturer. That one I don't need to send you. So there was already some filtering there.
Right.
But in this case, we're getting raw feeds, so there's no real filter applied.
Right. So what if instead of paying an external law firm to read your feeds for you, what if, because everything's in one platform, the other customers that are using the platform are doing the reading for you and filtering for you?
That's very clever, Phil Lim.
Right. So the idea here is that if we actually have this centralized database on our ACL platform, then every other ACL customer who's out there, they can go and action these items or not action these items. And by the other customer not actioning the item or actioning the item, we can determine whether or not that item is important.
Okay, interesting. So, sorry for the plug. There was lots of ACL talked about there, and again, our bias with the tools that we know.
Sure.
But based on how other firms like mine have actioned these particular updates, you're using that data to score and create this, what you just scrolled off of while I was talking.
Yes, the importance.
The importance score to suggest a priority by which we work through these several hundred regulatory updates.
Right, exactly. So we've got a few hundred regulatory updates, and what the customer can do, and they can go in here and they change the status. Maybe instead of, they'll read through this and they'll say, okay, well, FinCEN is suggesting they amend the broker-dealer securities, the definition for that. So that might mean that we now need to go through our policies with our broker-dealers and update that policy. And so we'll create an action off of that. And maybe a lot of the other customers that are out there that are using this feed are also doing that. So that's why this one's raised up.
And by
a lot
create
higher.
an action, you mean like this would go out to a relevant business owner and
Yep.
say, hey, what do we need to do here? Update a process, update a policy, implement a control.
Exactly. So
Whatever.
update the training, all sorts
training.
of yeah,
Right,
all
yeah.
sorts of regulatory action compliance that needs to be done. Maybe it's changing a financial model even. So sometimes it's just a change in the way that you're conducting your stress testing, for example.
So you wore those funny glasses and a sweet trucker hat to look very credible in positioning this thing to the industry to say, how do you think about looking for important regulatory updates?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not me saying it. It's around whether or not your peers are saying whether or not a regulatory alert is important or not. So you can take their word for it or not, but ultimately,
That's an intriguing idea.
it's a way for you to cut through all of the BS and get to the results that matter. So
But as a regulatory compliance leader, perhaps this provides me some prioritization. But in my organization, compliance is a big deal. I'm going to action every single one of these because we're not willing to take any compliance risk. Where perhaps in another organization, you're willing to take some compliance risk.
No, Dan, because there's a regulatory update here that says that there was a school bus fire by the NTSB, and we're not going to action that in our organization. So some of these just really, because of the nature of the publishing,
A school bus fire.
we really shouldn't be doing anything off of. So yeah, we'll go in there and we'll action it as we're not going to do anything about. We're going to ignore this regulatory update, and by me doing that, everybody else that's using the system is also going to know that I did that. And
So this is the fundamental idea: is how can we add additional data intelligence into the data we get from the regulator to be more smart about where we need to kick off workflows to do something about regulatory change?
yeah, because what you want to do is you want to spend 80% of the time on the 20% most important regulatory updates, and then shovel the rest of them off and not focus on
So
those.
once again, for lack of a better term, data automation and data analytics and robotic process automation is the key to narrowing down focus to where it should be for the most optimal regulatory change program is what you found with this
Exactly.
exercise.
Exactly. It's not just about going out and consolidating everything into a central database. It's around everybody on this planet who's a risk and compliance professional working together on figuring out where they should be spending their time.
Very visionary of you, Phil. It matches the smartness with the glasses.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, that's pretty much all I had to share today. It's there's a few pieces in here, whether it's about putting everything together and using robotics automation technology to consolidate regulatory updates, or pulling into the feeds of your peers. There's a couple of things there to take away.
Thanks for coming back to Office Hours again, Phil. Everybody, please, if you enjoyed the video, if you found something useful, like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to our podcast. Building up our audience really makes it easier for us to improve the content and build additional episodes in the future. Phil, thanks so much. I don't know why you're drinking beer out of a gin glass. That's kind of
I
embarrassing.
can't read it.
I know, and I'm sorry I made fun of your hat and glasses. They're actually pretty cool.
Thanks.